Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Had a nice weekend. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm very well. We're into
Good.
the sort of second half of Ramadan, so yeah, feeling spiritually energized. Still a little bit fatigued,
Mm,
but looking forward to another money and life conversation
me too.
with yourself today. So let me dive straight in. An
All right.
interesting conversation in my household during the week. It was my daughter's birthday last week, and she received presents from various family members. She was happy with gifts being given. She's saving up for her first car because she passed her test recently.
All right.
So my wife might have put out the fact that she's saving for a car, and therefore, I think that indicates that you rather have cash than sort of presents, which is a polite way of saying, yeah, cash is needed. And she received a very substantial cash gift, more than she would have expected from a particular family member, who's always very generous anyway.
Mm,
She opened the envelope and I was there, and
mm,
she saw the amount of cash,
mm,
and her face kind of like it kind of dropped a little, as in it looked like it was almost like a bit of fear or anxiety sort of came
mm.
over, and she was just like, but this is way too much. And immediately, like as she said that, I just noticed there was a shift in energy, like it became very uncomfortable, and she was like, why did she give so much, like this, that, the other? And all of this like narrative and projection started to come out, and I was like, oh, this is great, let's talk about this. Problem of money podcast episode right here. So I said, do you know what? This is really interesting. Like, can we talk about this if you're okay with it? I've noticed now that I can't go gung ho into these conversations as much as I want
Right.
to.
Like you
You
are.
need
Yeah.
permission, and so I just started to ask a few questions around. Okay, so what is it about this particular number that you've received in pounds sterling? You know, which has made it a lot more difficult to accept as a gift. Whereas if the number changed, you would have been sort of comfortable with it. And so we just started having this discussion around how when the number changes, our feeling when receiving a gift changes drastically, and all of these things and all of these emotions start coming up. And so there was a lot of stuff coming up for her. There was a lot of stuff coming up for my wife as well, because I could notice that she was getting a little bit, not agitated, but she was she was also like, yeah, oh, this is there's so much, and this, that, the other, blah blah blah. And so I was like, so what's going on for you? And for her, it was like, well, I don't think I could reciprocate that level of giving for that family member or that family member's daughter. So it was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And so I thought, oh, do you know what? This is a really good one to highlight. I think, having conversations with your kids, I think it's important. It's something that I enjoy. That's probably a separate thing. But this whole idea of, how do we receive? And there's so much that gets tied up when we receive something, especially a feeling of guilt, the sort of the expectation of, what do I deserve? This whole idea of, this person has now given me so much. Would I be able to reciprocate? I mean, there are so many themes there. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah. Wow. I can kind of feel it, right? As you said, I can feel your energy diving
Yeah.
in. I can feel me kind of just full up as you mention all these things. There's guilt, there's reciprocity, there's too much. I can kind of just feel very full, right? And so I guess the first thing to say, and I don't know if your family will be happy about this or not, but great that you noticed it, and great that you took the moment to invite them into a conversation, because as you and I have been exploring, over many episodes now, this stuff's going on the whole time, right? When there's a number where there's money, not just receiving, giving, spending, saving, all of it, it carries for most of us a tremendous emotional load. And normally we're not aware of the emotional load, or if we are, we just want to get away from it. So we speed through the conversation, or we just we're almost running away from whatever that emotional charge is. That's one of the main reasons money remains a taboo, and we're not conscious. So you had this phrase when we were just checking in before we recorded, Shabba, making money conversations day to day. I guess one of the things you and I want to do in these podcasts, the first step is get people to just be curious about all of this stuff. The next step is, can I begin to talk about it? Because, she's feeling this and my wife's feeling this and I'm feeling this and we might have to. It's in the room. All of that energy and emotions in the room. So can we begin to talk about it and hopefully have good conversations, not money rows? And, as people go further into this, and we've touched on this in some of our episodes, not all of them, can I make that flip? So whatever's going on for me about guilt or embarrassment or it's too much, can I use that as a mirror for my own growth, So I don't know if you got there at the breakfast or the kitchen table, but just having the conversation is a great start. So receiving. Well, you mentioned some stuff. So, I've got some thoughts and I've noted them down. And also it reminds me, I was talking to someone at the weekend who'd inherited money, and inheritance is one form of receiving. Obviously carries a lot of emotion in all sorts of ways because it's tied up with loss and grief, but also often very mixed feelings about your relationship with the person who died and the amount. And lots of families fall out over inheritance. So it reminded me of that. And if we've got time, maybe we draw some parallels between a birthday gift and an inheritance, because it's all about receiving and maybe receiving from family members. What did you notice? You said a few things. So before I dive in, where did the conversation go? Did anyone manage to really notice what was actually happening for them in that conversation?
I think for me, it was just insightful to shine a light on the fact that this number made you feel uncomfortable, whatever that emotion is.
Yeah.
But if we just change the number, suddenly everything's okay.
Yeah.
And for me, that was actually the only thing that I really wanted the girls to get out the conversation. Because I think that's just the first start, is to just say, look, just be aware of what's happened, that we've just changed the number. And also for them to just realize what they're projecting onto the number. Right.
Yeah.
And so we didn't go that deep into, okay, do you think you're worth this amount of money and this, that, yeah. I mean, because I think at the end of a long day of fasting, it probably wasn't the sort of but I just wanted to highlight, and I think that's where I'm going with these conversations, is bringing awareness, because that's the first step, right? Just being aware of, okay, look, this is how I acted, or interacted with this particular number. Playing a bit of an experiment, if the number was a little bit less, I would have been perfectly okay with the gift, and I would have been, I am happy, but there's a bit of a burden now with this bigger amount. And so we picked up on that, and we spoke about that, and we talked about some of the things that were sort of coming up. And my younger daughter was also in on the conversation, and you could tell that they were smiling when they were which is always a good sign that they're okay, I can see that, how it's only the number that's changing. And I was trying to make them see the fact that, wow, this person has expressed some form of love or affection for you through making this gift. Being able to receive it, I think, in the right way is also very important. And just a side note, since we've been having these conversations, and I can't remember where I heard this from, but I always used to get very annoyed when my mum would give me money. Well, I'm going to be 44 this year. And, when my mum gives me birthday money, or just now and again, she'll just want to give me like 20 quid or something like that. And I'm like, I'm a 44-year-old man, for God's sake. My mum shouldn't be, but there's something going on in her money relationship, which she feels she wants to express something by gifting me money for my anniversaries, birthdays, this, that, the other. And I'm projecting onto that because my parents are retired. I know that they're not financially well off. So I'm coming at that particular conversation with my own sort of projections of, you shouldn't be doing this. But I've now learned that I should allow her to express her gift giving rather than poo-pooing it. Okay, do you know what? they're not gonna end up under a bridge because she's given me 50 quid, right?
No.
That's not gonna happen. In my mind, I'm going to, well, if you're a bit irresponsible with money and you just keep giving it out, this, that, the other.
Yeah.
But actually, it becomes so much nicer when you just like let them give. If
Yes.
they're finding something in that,
Yeah.
and be a good, be a good
Be a
receiver of the.
gracious receiver.
Yeah,
And it's hard for many of us to be gracious receivers.
yeah.
So let's talk about that then. There may be many different reasons about being gracious receivers. So the first thing, great that you had the conversation, and it's really fun to play with money numbers. So like, I don't know,
It's so much fun.
I get
It's so
this
much
figure.
fun.
And then the first thing you noticed was your daughter, her whole body language tenses, her face looks serious. So you go from, oh, that's a nice gift. Oh, isn't that nice? It shows up in the body. That's the first thing to say. So even though in my mind I might be saying I really would like money for a car, in my body there's something else registering that's, it is this deeper emotion. So I can notice receiving, but in any money situation, where do I get tense? Where does it start to feel heavy? Where's it burdensome? There's always some investigation for me to do there. And then, yeah, great. You could literally, I've done this with people in workshops. You say, okay, well, it's this figure, whether it's my earnings or a gift or my pension. So if it was £1 less, would that be okay? And they go, well, of course, it's only £1. And you can really start to get people aware that this strong emotion about a number is much more arbitrary and strange than we think. And that's always a good thing to do with any money number. You and I discussed in previous episodes about the future and freedom in the future and chasing the number. And this idea of people chasing the number, well, you can do the same thing. If you had £1 less, would that be okay? So you can really play with it. But maybe for today, we look specifically at receiving. Yeah, receiving. I think many of us find it hard to be good receivers. So let's dig into that. The first thing I do want to say is there is something I think to be respected about true reciprocity, right? Giving and receiving. There's a very interesting guy called Bert Hellinger who didn't particularly talk about money. He talked about families and underlying dynamics in families and groups, and tried to describe what needs to be kind of in order or in good flow for a family to be healthy, or for a workplace or a group to be healthy. And he called them, these 5 principles, he called them orders of love. Orders of love.
Mm.
And we won't dive into all of it. But one of the 5 orders of love that needs to be not necessarily balanced, but needs to be healthy is called give and take.
Mm.
Give and take. So humans do seem to naturally feel uncomfortable if over the long term, and if over a kind of a chronic pattern, one person is always giving, the other person always receiving, or if there's something not quite right about it. So you imagine in a relationship, in a marriage, if it's always the case that one's always kind of, I don't know, offering the support or offering this or giving this, and the other one is always in the role of receiving, what can happen over time is you occupy roles, and maybe unconsciously you like to give because you like to be the strong provider and you're not comfortable with your own vulnerability or your own need, and the other person isn't in touch with their strength. And that's when it gets tricky, right? Unconsciously adopt certain patterns or relationships. And it suits us both over the longer term to always be, I'm always giving, you're always receiving. And often that's not healthy, and resentment builds because we're not being full, right? So I want to respect that humans, I think, have some sensitivity to give and take. It's important. However, I think that is over kind of longer term patterns of relationship. And as you all know, in any relationship or marriage, there might be periods of time, and it might be months or years, where one of you really kind of just needs more support or is facing more challenge. And also in a marriage, I use marriage as a kind of easy example to begin with. What we give and receive might also be very different. It might be money, but not just money, or one of us might provide financially for a time. and the other provides something different. So while give and take or reciprocity does seem to be an important thing for humans to get in balance, the problems come, you know what I'm going to say, the
Yeah.
problem comes, A, when we think it's only about giving and receiving a number, and then we forget all the other things that could be given and received within a family: love, connection, enjoyment,
Mm.
support, etc., etc. Also, if it's only sort of one moment in time, right? So who knows, right? I don't know the situation, but maybe it's very appropriate in the deeper order of things that right now your daughter, I know maybe she just got her driving license, so 17, 18 or whatever, that is a time on the whole where it's kind of appropriate that adults who can and who are resourced might want to give very freely to support you into a next
Mm.
step of life, right? And it might be, I don't know, in 30 years, maybe this person's situation is very different, your daughter's situation, and then there's a longer term reciprocity. Or it may also be that there's a reciprocity now, just something about their relationship, their connection, family ties, right? So I think the mistake that we quickly make, because it brings up so much stuff, is A, we shouldn't think give and take is just about a number or the size of a number. It could be about many things ideally flowing healthily in a society or a family or relationship, money and not money. And also, it seems absolutely fine at different stages of life or different stages of a relationship that one might occupy more the role of the giver
Mm.
or the receiver, as long as we realize it's much more of a play and part of life than, a money-centered view would have us.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about love languages, when you were
Yes.
talking about,
Yeah.
and slightly different, but people like to give and receive
Yeah.
in different ways, right?
Yeah.
My love language is, acts of service. So I'm very happy to give in terms of acts of service, doing things,
Yeah.
and I like to receive, acts of service because I'm like, wow, oh, that's just fantastic. Whereas, my wife might be, words of affirmation or gifts or whatever. We all have a few that we sort of lean towards, but I think understanding that as well
Yes.
in the context of giving and receiving
Yeah.
within that dynamic, and it's almost like, yeah, showing up for the other person in the ways that they like to receive, I think is also quite important. But I mean, that's just going off a little
But
bit on a side
it's
tangent.
all connected, actually.
Yeah.
So maybe people don't know love languages. Maybe we could put references both to the
Yeah.
Hellinger 5 orders of love and the love languages. If we got notes, we can put them in. They're useful because what both of them do is they just open up to the fact that what wants to kind of flow between people, and not just family, but actually it's true, I believe, in work and with clients and colleagues, is more than just numbers. But, the mistake that we make, as we've been exploring in all these podcasts, is we sort of fixate on a number. We miss all the other things that might be going on, exchange within a relationship. And then the number immediately means something to us on the emotional level, and we might have a trouble with it. So I don't know what was going on with your daughter, maybe you do, but some of the typical things that I've seen when we receive gifts or inheritance. First is, this kind of reciprocity, like, oh, well, I owe them something now. It's like, it's too much. It's almost like a burden because I'm not able to just experience the pleasure of receiving and being resourced. I immediately feel it's too much. I have to give back, and I don't know that I can give back. So then I feel very uncomfortable. So the step there, A, is to think, well, maybe I'm giving back in many other ways. Maybe at this time it's really appropriate that resource flows to me because I'm younger and they're older. Maybe in the
Hmm.
future I will give back. So to realize I probably do and can still give back. It may just be less obvious.
Mm.
That's a useful reflection. A deeper and more provocative thing is to think, what is the name for someone who doesn't give back? Who takes, like there's
Yeah.
a judgment there.
Yeah.
I would be
Greed
mean, or
is
greed, it might be greedy, I'm
selfish.
taking
It's
too much.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So
Interesting.
one reflection is to realize that actually probably in a healthy family, there will be exchange. You just might not be seeing it because your view's too narrow and
Mm,
money centered. But the second, if you've got the courage and you maybe have someone to support you, is to follow the judgment and say, what does it really mean? Maybe it means I'm greedy or selfish or needy, actually. People often who do need things, and in a very lovely, beautiful way, your daughter's needy because she needs
yeah,
cash for a car, right? So great to be needy, but there's often a shame with seeing the side of us that is greedy or is needy or is selfish. Maybe we have religious views or family views or culture. It's bad. And so what happens is when we receive, it's kind of that part of us that is there, because we have all of these parts, they're all parts of human nature, but we resist or we're not in touch with, gets very active. This would mean I'm greedy. This would mean I'm selfish. This would mean I'm
mm,
a needy person or whatever. I'm a burden. And the step there, if possible, is to realize I already am and always have been, because all humans are.
mm,
Our choice, again, is not whether we have all of these different facets, it's whether we can be conscious of them. So I'm either unconsciously greedy, and then my greediness and my meanness and my neediness will actually still come out, and my friends and family will notice, but it will be often in a sort of a bit of a shady sort of way, or a way I don't see.
yeah,
Or I can be in touch with it. And if I can be in touch with my need or my greed and realize it's okay, I'm greedy and it's okay, I'm needy
mm,
and it's okay, then it can flow much more. And I might be able to experience the pleasure below the judgment. These words carry lots of heavy, greedy, selfish, but
yeah,
greedy as a human capacity, right? When used consciously, and that's the key thing, right? A lot of damage is done in the world right now by people who are greedy and selfish, but they're not conscious, they're not in touch with it. And then it goes crazy and it gets expressed in unhelpful ways. But the simple act of consciously being able to say, right now, I would really like resource, or I really would need this in order to move forward with my life or create something or do something, that's necessary. And people who, in general, and I mean at any stage in life, but people who are absolutely unable to be in touch with their human greed and selfishness and neediness often find themselves very under-resourced because they're
mm.
ashamed of asking or opening up or,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I was going to ask. So, the other side of the coin is being open to asking, right? So,
yeah,
receiving is, I would call it the passive part of the process, but the active is actually, and I think that might be a separate conversation because
well,
I think there's an art, not an art, but there's also an understanding to be arrived at when it comes to actually asking for money, which is very difficult in so many situations when you might need that resource,
yeah,
and being able to ask for it is
yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's very related. In a way, there was an ask because your wife had already said, so and so it wants a car. So there had been an ask, but it had been again maybe a
Yeah.
subtle ask, or so maybe even there's a little bit of embarrassment in the system. That it's like, oh,
Mm.
actually, I did ask, and bloody hell,
And
someone
getting a
responded, and now I realise I did ask. Like
yeah,
I realised there was an ask for cash to buy a car, and someone maybe responded in a very free and elegant and
yeah,
beautiful way. But it revealed to me I was actually asking for something quite big, so that might be a little bit edgy.
yeah.
Maybe it was an ask, but it wasn't a fully conscious ask. How does that sound when I say it that way in that context?
Yeah, I mean, it's the things that we want to say, but we don't really say them. But like you said, that they come out, and it is. But I mean, that would be natural discourse, because people say, "Oh, well, what does she want for her birthday? Oh,
Yeah,
she's saving
yeah,
for a car."
yeah,
So, but actually, what would be different would be is actually going out and saying, "Look, by the way, this year for her birthday,
yeah,
she
yeah,
wants a car, so
yeah,
cash only,
yeah,
please." Like that would be, oh my God, what?
yeah,
Can you imagine going out and saying that? it's almost like, I used to get quite triggered at this when people would put down on their wedding invitations,
Yeah.
no boxed gifts.
Right.
So it's like, all right, so what there actually is can we just have an envelope of cash?
Okay, I wasn't aware of that phrase. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. So this is another conversation,
yeah, that's another
but what I
conversation.
see is you are quite energized by that, and you related it to a story about people asking for money. So Shabba, probably we need to talk about you asking and you asking for money. But
Yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah.
so even talking about it, we noticed. To come back to your daughter in this situation, there's a very important step
Okay.
which we need to do here. Having focused on, I might be a bit reluctant or judgmental of greed in myself or neediness. So I really need to get, I am greedy and it's okay. I am
Mm,
selfish and it's okay. We always include the other side as also self-evidently true or true at this deeper level. So, very often, for example, if I'm afraid of my greed and neediness, I might think, well, it's bad to be greedy and needy. It's good to be generous and
mm,
self-reliant, for example.
yeah,
Then the problem can come is I tie that up with money as well, you see.
yeah,
So instead of seeing I'm a human being and I'm perfectly self-reliant and a generous person, and I'm needy and greedy, and there's no, at this deep human level, there isn't a contradiction, but we feel there is. I'm one or the other. So then
mm,
what happens is I feel, well, if I really could receive this gift, that means I'm not a generous, self-reliant person. It means I'm greedy.
mm,
So what I have to do is see, well, it's okay to be really okay to be greedy. And I am self-reliant and I am generous, and it's nothing to do with getting a large gift. And then I kind of start to feel then, I can go from agitated or heavy to a bit
mm,
more calm, because the qualities I want to be, my self-reliance,
yeah,
aren't diminished just because someone gave me a bigger present. And you can
mm,
see logically that doesn't make any sense, right? If your
yeah,
daughter is a generous person, if she wins the lottery or someone gives her
yeah,
a present, or it doesn't change a quality she has in her being,
yeah,
but we feel that it does.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And on the reciprocity front as
Mm.
well, I could, I think that would be one where I could definitely see that, oh, because I'm not able to reciprocate in maybe the monetary terms,
Yeah,
that I'm not generous,
yeah,
but you're discounting your generosity and your giving in so many other ways,
you
which
are.
we've just latched onto the number.
Yeah,
I can't reciprocate the number, therefore
yeah. And I can't
I'm,
reciprocate it now in a
yeah,
monetary way. Yeah,
and all the judgments that come with it. And
yeah,
so that's quite important as well.
yeah. And the heaviness comes from all of that, and the reason we can't be gracious receivers comes because I kind of suddenly feel, well, if I really have this, it means I'm not generous, right? It takes
Mm,
something away from me, or it means I am greedy and I don't want to be. And that's where our body changes, and you saw it.
mm,
And then, just maybe one more step before we think about how could someone listening to this apply this in
mm,
their life. Then you get a beautiful paradox, which is this. If my aunt gives me a very large amount of money, and I'm so caught up in my kind of bodily, oh, I don't want to be like this. I'm not conscious of that, but I get tense and it's too much and I feel heavy. It's very hard for me to be a gracious receiver, right? But actually, if I'm a truly generous person, the most generous thing in that moment is to be gracious and receive and allow the
mm,
support or the love or whatever it is, to allow it in and to respond and use that money in service of whatever's important, whether it's a car or life, or I give it to charity, it doesn't matter. So the paradox is, in a way, the most selfish thing I can do in that moment is to be so caught up with that I can't actually open myself to what's flowing. And the most generous thing to do is to be able to actually receive that gift. So there's a real paradox there, but it's not a paradox I can think myself through. I have to go through those steps which you noticed, of noticing in my body, oh my God, I feel tense and heavy. and then going, okay, what's going on? What do I think it makes me to receive this? And what do I think I'm going to lose or diminish by
Mm,
taking it? And realizing, no, that's not to do with the money. They're both parts of me. It's really okay. And then I can kind of relax and actually allow the gift to come.
yeah. And and this is the thing that I noticed was, and I was like, "Mm, all that's happened is that there's been a transfer of a number from one person to another. That's all that's really happened.
Yeah.
And like you said, you get so fixated on that that you lose all of the good stuff that is happening as a result of that transaction, that movement of, a number from one person's bank account. Okay, they happen to give some paper which had some numbers on it. So this, they've taken some paper out of a machine and they've put it in an envelope and given it to you. And suddenly, like, this whole world has become, very complex and murky and a bit kind of like, I'm a bit unsure now. How do I react? How do I behave with this person and all of that?
Yes.
It's literally just, it's a number. And now all the bigger number allows you to do is maybe buy more stuff, or maybe it makes a bigger contribution to your car. I said, that's all they've really done is, they've just helped you, they've given you the resources to go in whatever it is that you want to do with that now. And it was just quite interesting how it was unfolding.
It's amazing to notice. I want to offer, so I think that's great to notice with the money
Yeah,
numbers. Like, well, hang on, all that's happened is some digits
yeah,
have changed on the
yeah,
screen, or an email was sent, or, some paper moved, albeit paper that's very highly charged and we all
yeah,
think does stuff. But I'd like to also offer a complementary view to what you said. And I
mm,
think both are really useful. So one is, all that's happened is some numbers change. I would say, yes, when I'm focused on the number and it brings that
mm,
stuff, then all that's happened is number. But what if I said, well, actually, many things happened. Some numbers moved, and that's not a big deal. But what also moved is there was an expression of love to your daughter, and maybe really an expression of support or encouragement for her independence at this stage in life. Like, I don't know that's what was in your,
mm,
of course I don't know.
yeah,
But generally, if I'm a resourced older person and I'm moving some numbers to, a younger person I care about who wants a car, yes, I can say, well, just some numbers moved. But actually, if we don't just look at numbers, well, maybe other things moved. Maybe there was a real flow of love, a
mm,
flow of encouragement, a flow of support. Maybe there's even some sense of someone kind of rejoicing or cheering on the younger generation of moving out into the world.
mm,
So potentially there's a lot of very subtle but very
yeah,
tender and very important stuff that's happened. And I miss that if I'm
yeah,
focused on the number. Whether I can accept the number or not, I miss it. And also maybe there's an aunt who doesn't have the same amount of money, right? And who can't give money, but writes a beautiful letter. Or, I don't know, chooses a very special small gift, or even a favourite book or something. Again, if I'm focused on the number, I could easily think, well, that's a big gift, that's a small gift. But
mm,
if I tune into what's behind the gift, they might be of really equal value. They might both be expressions of love, expressions of support, encouragement, and that's really beautiful. So I think it's good to look at both ways. The number doesn't
mm,
matter, and what else is going on around the
yeah,
number that could be really valuable.
absolutely. So where do we cap this off?
I would invite people listening to notice in the next week or two when there's a possibility of receiving, to notice when that's money, but also when there might be other things they can receive. It could be anything: affection, attention, time, support, encouragement, a friendly smile. I mean, literally anything. So be curious about when you receive money and not money, how you respond, what feels easy, what feels comfortable, and what little steps, what little edges there might be that if you work with him in the way we've described on this podcast, how you might just open yourself up a little more to truly receive, but to being a really gracious receiver of both money and non-money in the world. I'd be really interested if people wanted to get in touch, how they experience that. I think it can be genuinely very profound and life-changing for many people, not necessarily in a week.
Yeah.
But there's something really important, and I want to mention it. We maybe get into it more in another podcast. But often we do feel with money, the modern money system is so much about I have to earn a living or I have to deserve. We're so trained to think that in order to receive, we have to sort of have put some effort or merit or ego into it, that the idea that we can be receiving in so many ways from people and maybe from the world itself is quite alien, but I think might be incredibly important for our society to really start to understand this. I've gone off on one then, apologies, but I think it's important. But yeah, as a little homework or exercise, just open to receiving money and not money, notice what's easy and difficult, and just see if there's one little step just to become a slightly more gracious receiver.
And just on that, just being a gracious receiver, does that also not necessitate, but also imply that you don't feel compelled to have to reciprocate? Because especially in our sort of Indian, East African sort of tradition of, like, if you receive something, especially like, for example, in Ramadan at the moment, like you receive some food, like it's almost like the done thing is that you have to then reciprocate and give something back, right? If the neighbor brings around a plate, you don't send the plate back empty. You then, put some, make something, etc. This is like a whole different thing in terms of this almost feeling the obligation to reciprocate. Is one that I think fills people with a lot of anxiety, because it's like, how to reciprocate, what should I reciprocate, if they've given something to me, I've got to give something back, and you end up in this dance almost like,
and it's a very neurotic dance, if we're honest. It's
I
a
feel like
tight,
it is,
anxiety-fueled neurotic dance.
yeah, because then and then what you have is, then you just, like, we've got a month of fasting. This is just a side note. And then you've got all of this food flying around, which is just in excess, because all of these people are giving and receiving and reciprocating, and then you've just got an abundance of food when nobody actually needs, that much food. And it's almost like, okay, is there another way to express this?
Let me offer some thoughts, and maybe again we could do a whole episode on that. So I think people can, explore for themselves what it might mean to be a gracious receiver. And yes, a lot of what you've described, though, of course, I understand it, right? In society and family and different subcultures, that reciprocity is important and often anxiety fueled. So what might be another way of relating to that? Remember I said at the beginning, give and take is important over time in relationships and in different ways. So if my neighbor was always bring stuff to me and I literally never did, who knows why, but there might eventually be some resentment in there or something ungracious about the setup. So maybe, but at the same time, if every time someone brings round, a plate of dates, I might go, oh my God, what am I going to do? Yeah, that's not very gracious. So here's some things I could do. First, I could notice all of that process going on in me when I receive and be curious in the ways we've described. And then what I might do, and this might be edgy for people, but I might, especially at a spiritual time, I might kind of connect with my heart, and I might, in any way that, made sense to me, I might kind of really feel, wow, that person's really given something. And I might make in some way a wish or an intention, or however you would frame it. I absolutely make the wish to give to them, in the best way, at the best time, in the perfect way I absolutely intend and want to respond. So I've kind of honored my need to reciprocate, but I haven't neurotically gone out and bought more dates that I then give back to them, because if my reciprocity is fueled by anxiety, in other
Mm.
words, I run around and give you some dates because I'm neurotic, that's not generosity.
Yeah.
That's not being generous. Whereas if I can receive and then in my heart think, really, may I, when the time is right, soon or in the future, with money, dates, or whatever's needed, I absolutely wish and intend to give to this person. That's much more gracious. And then when the time is right, or in ever
Mm.
which way is needed, I know I will do that. I believe what that does is that actually strengthens our bond and our connection. And it
Mm.
allows good things to flow, if you like, in the channel between us, but it
Mm.
doesn't impose an industrial diary based, it needs to be by the 15th of April or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think people could explore those ideas.
Yeah. That's great, Tim.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
I
More to
want to
do.
hear from people. I want
Yeah.
to hear from people on this topic. So
Yeah.
yeah, look forward to some comments. All right, I'll see you next time, Tim.
Thank you, Shabba. See you soon.